Okay, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for logging back on after the short break. We've got a very busy day today, so we really appreciate you all being back on time. So my name is Nicola Richards, and I'm working as a consultant at the moment with ESCAP on a few of their different civil registration projects. I'm really excited to be moderating this session this afternoon. We will have a chance to listen to some really interesting presenters talking about strengthening processes for death registration and also medical certification, which we know are significant challenges for many countries in the region and also wider. So really interested to hear from our presenters today. I, first of all, though, am very welcome to present our keynote speaker, Dr. Philip Sattel, who works with Vital Strategies. So he's the Director and Vice President of the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Improvement Program with Vital Strategies, and as part of the Bloomberg Philanthropies Data for Health initiative that many of us have also been involved with. And we are very lucky to have him here because I believe it is exceptionally late for him in the United States. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and open this session for us, Philip, and I will give you the floor.
Thanks so much, Nicola, and thanks all for attending. Good morning or good mid-afternoon at this point. I don't know what time it is for you where you are. So if we could have the slide, title slide, please. There we go. So today I've been asked to speak a little bit about strengthening cause of death data in the region. And I've decided to title my talk No Longer Flying Blind, because as you'll hear, we are making some progress in the region, and things are, for some countries, are becoming into focus with regard to cause of death data. Next slide, please. I don't have a lot of time to spend with you, but I would like to cover several issues. It won't be possible to go into them in as much depth as they should be gone into. However, I do think that we can spend a little bit of time talking about each of these topics, and I'd be happy to answer questions later on. Next slide, please. So what are we really talking about when we're talking about getting reliable cause of death data? Next slide, please. Well, first, we want to be sure we're distinguishing death registration from medical certification and the assignment of cause of death. Death registration is about the fact of death, and it's a function, of course, of the CRVS system. Medical certification is the process of determining and recording the medical cause of a person's death. And it's done by a medical practitioner according to the standards of what is called for short the ICD. There are two parts to the certification process, or to determining a cause of death using ICD. The first is to write the medical certificate of cause of death, and the second is to have it coded by ICD coding rules. Next slide, please. But it's also important to bear in mind what needs to be done in contexts where there's no physician to certify the cause of death. There's no laboratory findings. There's no physician around. In these instances, some form of verbal autopsy is increasingly becoming part of best practice, where deaths that occur away from facilities are followed up at the home by an interviewer who asks about signs and symptoms which can reliably be reported on by lay people that were experienced by the deceased person before death. And then lastly, the point about vital statistics is crucial here, because it's part of the reason that it's so important, and maybe the driving reason why it's so important to have good quality cause of death data. Vital statistics are ideally comprised of civil registration records that include cause of death. And yet we do want to pay attention to the fact that vital statistics themselves, do require quality analysis, reaching certain thresholds for completeness and data quality in order to be useful. Next slide, please. So what does good data look like if we have all these different components of a reliable cause of death data assignment system? Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this slide in any detail, but just to point out that there are standards, there are tools available, thresholds available that can be used to assess whether one's cause of death data or death certification data are suitable for use in policy contexts. As a rule of thumb at Vital Strategies, we're starting to look at using the thresholds for completeness that you see at the top of the slide. And we are using the automated features of the ANACOD program to do data quality checks on larger data sets. Next slide, please. Lastly, in relation to what's good quality data, there's a usability index with the following variables from the World Health Organization. And as you can see, there are parameters that relate to both the completeness and the quality of the cause of death data that help determine how usable it is according to this formula. Next slide, please. So we know what it is, we know what we're talking about in terms of the various components of a cause of death assignment system. And we've just looked at a few issues related to what constitutes quality cause of death data. But why is it important? Next slide, please. Well, first of all, it really is part of the human interaction of an individual family with the health system. It's among the last acts taken with respect to our time on Earth. And it provides survivors with some answers and some closure around the death of their loved one. At the same time, a medical certificate of cause of death that is correctly coded forms an individual record in a larger national cause of death data set. And that's why it's so crucially important that each and every death certificate be written with care and attention. Medical certificate, I should say, of cause of death. Death certificates should also be written with care. Next slide, please. So at a recent workshop, someone stood up and said, it was one of the government officials at the convening, said, let us not forget that behind every vital statistic is a person. And that was, I thought, so beautifully put, because indeed, the vital statistics that we need to derive from cause of death data are the result of every individual's death being recorded well and determined and assigned a cause of death using a well-proven evidence-based system. Next slide, please. Ultimately, what we're looking for is this virtuous cycle where continuous monitoring of disease burden, including causes of death, leads to program impact. Epidemiologic and demographic transitions are going to change the face of the cause of death picture and the mixture of causes of death, the epidemiologic profile of a given country. And the continuous monitoring of disease burden is also quite important, as we've learned from the COVID pandemic, for preparedness and response. This then leads to the use of data and the continuous monitoring of disease burden, the use of data for policy development, program planning, and so forth. So this virtuous cycle can operate when reliable data are used and when reliable cause of death data provided to policymakers to develop their policies and programs. Next slide, please. So where do we stand now? I'm looking at the clock. I know I only have a few more minutes, but I would like to do a little bit of stock taking about what I know in broad brushes from the region. Next slide, please. We know, just as a reminder, that globally 40% of deaths are unregistered, and we can see from the map that these 40% of unregistered deaths are concentrated in the countries that have the shaded areas and that are gray or light colored on the map. Next slide, please. And of those countries that are using ICD, only a few low and middle income countries are able to produce ICD coded data, as is shown in this map. Now, these data from both these maps are a little bit old, so I haven't seen a more recent map, but they're at least 5 or 6 years out of date. So if you're looking for your country and think, oh gosh, we do collect ICD coded data, then that's probably the reason why. Next slide, please. In the region, about half of the low and middle income countries appear not to be using ICD. And this ranges from some of the largest countries to some of the smallest. Among those responding that they do use ICD, however, 70% of them reported completeness of 90 to 100%, which is really terrific. Next slide, please. Similarly, with ill-defined causes, slightly more countries, even if they are using ICD, didn't seem to be able to produce the indicator. But among those responding, all but 3 had less than 20% ill-defined causes in their data, which is a terrific start. It's a lot of progress in terms of a regional picture. Next slide, please. The one challenge, next slide, that I would like to point out relates to a figure that I came across in the midterm report. And that is that if we look at this figure, notice that the square area really represents all deaths. And that little circle of deaths covered by verbal autopsy down in the left-hand corner has to cover all of those deaths that are not registered and those that are registered but happen outside of health facilities. So regionally, we know that up to 80% of deaths may be taking place outside of health facilities. So perhaps discharge and medical records plus verbal autopsy could form some sort of solution for getting good cause of death at the household level. Next slide, please. So just briefly to wind up, next slide. I thought I would point to a few promising developments in the region, which we've already heard about in the previous session, some of them. One is the improvement to business processes and legal frameworks for collecting cause of death in the CRVS system. We heard a whole presentation about that. The other is this important aspect of digitization. There are more and more resources available, but they have to go hand in hand, as we've been warned, with proper system redesign. You don't want to be digitizing an inefficient system. And then lastly, the out-of-facility deaths that we just spoke about. So in conclusion, my last slide, please. We've addressed that the assignment of cause of death using standard procedures and standard verbal autopsy methods really constitutes what we're talking about when we talk about the data sources we need to strengthen. Good data sources, good cause of death data means that each and every certificate and verbal autopsy interview matters, and we want to avoid the garbage in, garbage out problem. No other source of data can really provide what this system can, and without it, countries are flying blind, as Margaret Chan, the former Director General of WHO, once said. Policy making, planning, and M&E need to be informed by these data. So looking ahead, digitization offers an easier adoption of tools and built-in quality checks. It needs to connect to the provision of social services and health services. And lastly, it's not just a matter of training and education on how to do a correct death certificate or conduct a verbal autopsy interview. Sustainability requires much more institutional and organizational development and change before things can really be said to be sustainable. So sorry I took a few extra minutes, but thanks, Nicola, for the time and the opportunity to present.
think that was 1 minute extra, so you are most welcome to have that extra minute. Thank you very much, Philip, for your presentation. Some really important points for us to consider as we move throughout this session, and I think a fantastic segue as we move into the presentation from Dr. Tim Adair from the University of Melbourne, who will be talking to us a little bit about some of the work that's been done on integrating data from verbal autopsies to try and strengthen our local health evidence. I think Philip mentioned, 80% of deaths happening outside of healthcare facilities, so a huge area for focus. And I can see Tim popping up there, and we'll just bring up the presentations that we've moved across. And
okay, thank you, Nicola. I might make a start. So today I'll be talking about integrating verbal autopsy and medical certification of cause of death data to strengthen local health evidence. So we've been fortunate that there has been a lot of work undertaken in the last 5 to 10 years in introducing, or certainly the last 5 years or so, in introducing verbal autopsy as a routine way of ascertaining the cause of death. Next slide, please. Just before I go on, it's quite detailed what I'll be presenting today, and I'm really giving a fairly high level overview. And this work is based on 2 publications that you are able to access, which give a bit more information about not only the method that I'm presenting, but also the implementation of the method in Myanmar. Next slide, please. And I'd also just like to acknowledge the colleagues in Myanmar who undertook the data collection and also work with us on the analysis. As I mentioned, increasingly in many countries, there are 2 sets of routine cause of death data available for policy and planning purposes. So there's the traditional, so to speak, data from a medical certification of cause of death by physicians for hospital deaths. And as I mentioned, increasingly the verbal autopsy data for community deaths. And this presentation will be describing a method to estimate national and subnational cause-specific mortality rates and many such indicators where death registration is incomplete. Okay, so where not all deaths are being counted, but we're still able to, with this method, to integrate the medically certified data and also verbal autopsy data. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a bit of a schematic overview of the method that I will be describing today. So as Philip mentioned in his presentation, that ultimately cause of death data are of enormous public policy use. And as much as it is great that we have verbal autopsy data increasingly collected in many countries, especially because in many countries 80% or so of deaths are occurring in the home, we do still suffer from issues of incompleteness of mortality. And so this is something that needs to be taken into account when we develop these indicators. But one thing that certainly that many of us who work in this area try to emphasize is that just because data are of suboptimal quality does not mean that they cannot be used for generating statistics that are of policy utility. So just with this diagram here, so probably just best to start at the end here. So the bottom left-hand corner, there's a blue box there, and then the final output of what this method tries to do is to generate final cause-specific mortality fractions by sex and age. So basically what that means is for men and for women and for each age group, what percentage of deaths are due to ischemic heart disease or lung cancer, etc. And the method involves a few steps to get to that final point. So I won't go into too much detail about this because I'll return to this diagram again, but basically what we have, these purple boxes represent information about deaths in the community. and the red boxes represent information about deaths in the hospital. So community deaths are represented by verbal autopsy data, and hospital data are represented by medically certified cause of death data. And this diagram summarises some calculations that need to take place to generate these final cause-specific mortality fractions. Next slide, please. So before we want to integrate data, there are a few steps we need to take. Firstly, verbal autopsy data are increasingly being collected for community deaths, but given that in many cases or in many countries the community deaths are least likely to be reported or registered, then it's very likely that not every community death will actually have a verbal autopsy to ascertain its specific cause. And so firstly, we need to calculate the percentage of community deaths with a verbal autopsy. And some of the two publications that I mentioned earlier describe some methods of doing this. We don't have time in this presentation to be able to go into detail about how to do that. But basically, if only say 50% of community deaths in the catchment population have a verbal autopsy, it's very likely that they will not be an accurate representation of the causes of death for that particular population. It may be that people in more urban areas, for example, have a cause of death, while in more rural areas perhaps less likely to have a cause of death, or to rather have the death reported and then a verbal autopsy conducted. Secondly, many of you would be familiar with ANACOD or Anaconda as tools for assessing the quality of medically certified cause of death data. And so when we're wanting to integrate both medically certified cause of death data and verbal autopsy data, it's important to assess the quality of both. And in the case of MCCOD data, a very useful metric is the percentage of deaths with a garbage cause or unusable cause, or in the R chapter. Some of you may be familiar with the R chapter, which is symptoms, signs, and ill-defined conditions. And then thirdly, also with verbal autopsy data, depending on the verbal autopsy algorithm used, the percentage of deaths with an undetermined cause. So where the algorithm couldn't ascertain a specific cause, that also needs to be assessed. And there are various thresholds that we mentioned in the publications about where the data may not be of good enough quality to be able to reliably go ahead with the cause of death integration method. And then next there's mapping of ICD cause to the VA cause list. So different VA methods have different cause lists, and so it's important to be able to map the ICD codes in the hospital deaths, in the medically certified deaths, to the verbal autopsy cause list. Next slide, please. Okay, so in a world where we have complete registration of deaths, it would be relatively straightforward, so to speak, to integrate medically certified cause of death data with VA data. Basically, you would say, for example, if 80% of deaths occur in the community and 20% occur in the hospital, you could weight the number of deaths from each source for each cause, and then calculate a total cause of death fraction. Unfortunately, in many countries where we have routine verbal autopsy introduced, also suffer from incompleteness of death registration. And so there are a few steps that need to be undertaken to calculate completeness of death registration separately for in the community and in the hospital, and then to make adjustments to the data to the estimated total deaths in the community and also in hospitals, and then using that estimated total number of deaths to adjust the cause of death data. I don't have time to go into the details. Again, there's a bit more information in the publications. Next slide, please. So just going back to this method, and I'll now go into it in a bit more detail. So the top left-hand box here, we have community cause-specific mortality fractions, by sex and age. So again, a cause-specific mortality fraction is the percentage of deaths from a particular cause, and in this case, for deaths in the community. We take these fractions and we multiply by an estimate of community deaths for all causes, so the total number of community deaths for each sex and also each age group. And that will then give us, on the right here, in the top right box, an estimated number of community deaths by cause, sex and age. We then repeat the process in the red boxes. So you have a hospital cause-specific mortality fraction by sex and age, multiplied by, excuse me, total number of hospital deaths by sex and age, and that will give us an estimated number of hospital deaths by cause, sex and age. We then sum the boxes on the right-hand side, which will give us estimated total deaths by cause, sex and age, from which we can then calculate a final cause-specific mortality fraction. Next slide, please. So I'll now just describe an example of how this method was used in Myanmar in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Sports. And they wanted to calculate SDG indicator 23, which is the probability of dying between ages 30 and 70 years from one of 4 non-communicable diseases, being cardiovascular diseases, cancers, chronic respiratory diseases, and diabetes. So verbal autopsy in Myanmar was introduced in 42 nationally representative townships in 2016 using the Smart VA tool. They also had medical certification of cause of death data from hospitals. And so we worked with the Ministry of Health and Sports in analysing their 2019 data. Next slide, please. So going back to the steps I described before, the cause of death data were of quite reasonable quality. Just over 10% of verbal autopsy deaths were undetermined. So for almost 90%, we had a specific cause. Just over 20% of MCCODs were of a garbage cause of very high or medium severity. So that is causes of less use for informing policy. And again, by international standards, that was quite useful. We estimated the number of deaths in the community and in hospitals. Firstly, we estimated that 70% of community deaths in 2019 had a verbal autopsy. Secondly, we also estimated that 89% of deaths occurred in the community. So very, you know, if we were to simply take an average of hospital causes of death and community causes of death, that would be a very biased calculation because almost 90% of deaths were occurring in the community. So verbal autopsy is extremely important in this setting. Next slide, please. And so this is a fairly detailed table showing the steps. Again, I don't have time to go through all the steps here, but the main columns you can see are the age group for both men and women, the percentage of deaths in the hospital, then the cause-specific mortality fraction for each specific source, and then the total that we calculated, and then a couple of extra steps to calculate the indicator. Next, can you just click again, please? And so what we found was that the SDG indicator of the probability of dying from any of the 4 causes was 0.2653 or 265 per 1,000 for men and 0.2155 or 215 per 1,000 for women, which are actually quite similar to WHO's model-based estimates for the same year or for a slightly earlier year. Next slide, please. And this chart here shows a scatter plot for males and females separately, showing the hospital cause-specific mortality fraction, and also that the fraction for each cause after the integration, so the final result. And you can see that any blue dot above the diagonal dotted line shows that you have a higher cause-specific mortality fraction from the final integration or use of the integration method than compared with the original hospital data. And firstly, this is not surprising, because these non-communicable diseases tend to be more common in the home than in deaths that occur in the hospital. But also it shows that any reliance on hospital cause of death data, especially in a context like Myanmar, when they only represent 10% of deaths and are generally biased towards younger ages and specific causes of death, any reliance on hospital cause of death data for this indicator would grossly underestimate the extent of these non-communicable diseases, especially where, in a setting like we have in much of this region, where these non-communicable diseases are becoming more important. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, integration of MCCOD and VA data is useful to understand total mortality burden and to measure progress towards national and international targets, such as the SDGs. It's very useful with so much data now being collected in many countries to be able to use such a method to generate these important indicators. So a thorough understanding of the characteristics and quality of the two data sets should be performed prior to application of the integration method. And certainly where completeness of verbal autopsy reporting is less than 70%, results should be interpreted with caution. And when interpreting results, please keep in mind any data quality issues you come across if you're using the method. And certainly the method described here can be implemented by country analysts with modifications for local data and the type of verbal autopsy tool employed. So I think that might be it. So thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tim, for a really interesting and in-depth explanation of the methods and also the outcomes. We've got a few minutes if people want to send any questions in through the chat, perhaps while everyone's busy typing. For countries that might be interested in doing something similar, what type of data sources could they use? So, for example, in one of your slides, you spoke about the need to estimate, the number of total community deaths and the number of deaths occurring in hospitals. Any thoughts on kind of what type of data sources that you used or that other countries might be able to use to help with those sorts of calculations?
Obviously you want to use MCC, medically certified cause of death data from hospitals, and obviously verbal autopsy data. I mean, if there's not so much common in this part in this region compared to Africa, but HDSS or health and demographic surveillance sites can also provide both VA data and I think MCCOD data.
So I think we were just talking about data sources. I'm not sure if you had anything more to add to what we're talking about, potential sources of data.
No, I didn't really have any more. I guess the method is primarily designed for both VA and MCCOD data, but potentially HDSS site data could be used, and certainly as a comparator data for calculating completeness. There may be, say, a capture-recapture survey conducted as well. Sorry, I just noticed there was also a question from Philip Settle on whether we adjusted for under-registration for female deaths and male deaths. Yes, we did do it separately. So female registration was somewhat lower than for men, so we made a calculation to adjust for that separately from men.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. I might just wrap that one up there as everyone else is coming into the room, but please, for those of you that still have questions or weren't able to hear all of the responses during our little technical glitch, please feel free to join Tim in the session at the end of the presentations to ask any additional questions. Thank you, Tim. All right, so with that, oh gosh, I didn't actually check to see if our next speaker has been able to make it into the room with us. Let me just...
It has not. Yes.
Okay.
So
I think I might have seen our speaker from Thailand pop up though. Oh, beautiful. There you are. Would you be happy to speak next? Very sorry to we're just having some connection issues with Lao. So if I could just ask us to skip ahead a few slides to the next presentation, please. Thank you. Beautiful. All right. Thank you very much, and thank you for graciously accepting to mix up the order a little bit. So everybody, I would like to introduce Ms. Asia-Pacific Kanta from the Ministry of Public Health in Thailand. And she's going to be speaking to us today about their work that they have done on implementing a medical certificate of cause of death audit system for hospital deaths in Thailand. So again, as what Philip mentioned in his keynote, really looking around quality of processes for deaths and for medical certification. So Ms. Kanta, I will leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Kanta, you're muted. You need to unmute your microphone, please. Ms. Kanta, can you please unmute your microphone?
Stop too. Looks like we're going to have all the gremlins.
Okay, can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I'm Asia-Pacific Kanta from Strategy and Planning Division, Ministry of Public Health, Thailand. Now I would like to present about the development and implementation of medical certificates of cause of death audit system for hospital death in Thailand. Next page. I'd like to give my acknowledgement for my team, Mr. Siripong Bodi, Ms. Wanvisa, Dr. Wansa Pao-in, Mr. Raksapon Sanitya, and Dr. Kanita Buntamsaran for helping us along the way on this project. Next slide. First, I would like to build the foundation of Thailand mortality data system. Now Thailand has over 66 million population, and according to the mortality data on 2019, there are more than 500,000 mortality cases per year. And in Thailand, we divide the types of death into two parts: the community death, which take the ratio about 55%, and on the hospital death there are 45%. And as our organization was responsible to improve and report the health report on the hospital death. So we have a death certificate, or in Thai called TORO 4/1, as our form to record the death data. This page shows the workflow on the death certificate, which it is the doctor in the hospital record the information about the death data from the hospital through the web application to issue their certificate. And that doctor print out the death certificate to the relative to declare the death to the registrar. This is a part of the relative thing, but the death data will flow in the system, which will link to the Bureau of Registration Administration, Ministry of Interior, to match the underlying cause of death with citizen ID, and it will throw back to the Ministry of Public Health to create and report the health statistical report. Yeah. So as our responsibility in improving the quality of the data, so in this project we improve the in-hospital death. Next slide, please. This project started from July 2021 to March 2023. We have developed and implement a system with assisting tool and system for regular review of medical death certificate by auditor doctor in 11 pilot provinces across Thailand. There are two main systems. First, the system of issuing death certificate. It is called electronic medical death certificate. This system is only used to record the data and issue the death certificate. And the next one, which is what we're working on it is called the audit system, medical certificate of cause of death audit system. This one we try to audit what has been issued, and we try to give feedback to the doctor to like help them to improve the underlying cause of death conclusion. Next, please. In this system, after the medical death certificate was created and issued in electronic format, the auditor will check every death certificate by searching more treatment history in the HDC or Health Data Center to find out more of the history to make the very near truth underlying cause of death. And we have divided into the review and the result. We have were rated into 3 parts. First, it is all correct. It is mean that the underlying cause of death that the primary doctor has concluded or summarized, and the match the auditor. It is that like they're both agreeing on that case. But the next one is the minor error. It is mean that the information recorded was not enough and need to be added or changed or edited on the diagnosis text, or there are lack of supporting cause of death and need to be like add more. And the last part is the incomplete or wrong conclusion. It is mean that primary doctor might write only mode of death instead of underlying cause of death. Next slide. Next slide, I'll present the result of this program. As I mentioned that we pilot this system to the first phase is on 5 pilot provinces, and the next phase is +6. So there are 11 provinces using this process, this program. On the top line, the dark red one is the number of death certificate issue. Now we have more than 2,000 death certificate issue using the electronic medical death certificate. And the middle one, the blue line, is the audit, the number of audited death certificate, which is around 50 to 60% of all the issue one. And the lowest line, the red line, is the audit result as incorrect. There are around 10 to 20% in each.
Ms. Cantor, we might ask that you maybe turn your video off. Sorry, we're just getting a little bit of glitching coming through the audio. That might help if you just turn off the camera. Thank you.
I just turned the camera off from my side. Ms. Cantor, can you?
I didn't see the presentation on.
Okay, now we can hear
We can
Ms.
hear you.
Cantor.
Oh, okay. That's the presentation is on the pie chart.
Yes, we
I
can see
have
we can see the presentation, and right now it's
Oh,
on
great.
the pie
Yeah.
chart.
I'm okay. I'm okay now. This one is the conclusion of the result of this auditing project. We have all correct case in 42% was marked as complete. 35% marked as minor error, which is the sequence of the underlying cause of death was switching, or the auditor doctor would like the primary doctor to add more support information, but still 25% marked as incorrect and needed to edit the underlying cause of death or need to write.
Ms. Cantor, I think you have muted yourself.
Ha, hello. Ha.
Now we can hear you.
This slide is the conclusion of the result that, oh, okay, the last slide. Okay, this one I'd like to conclude and present it to you that the electronic medical death certificate is new to our system. Like before this, we use the paper thing and communicate out the ministry. But now we use the electronic. It might new, but we try to improve more and more. The worker seems to happy about it, but there's still more communication to working on. There's still two major challenges. First is that there are still miscommunication on the using of the death certification thing and on the death certificate process in both Ministry of Public Health and the registrar. So Ministry of Public Health provide the SOP, the standard operating procedure on death certificate for physician to like make them understand and stick to what is the process of using electronic medical death certificate. And number two, the major challenges is that the auditor doctor, we have few auditor doctor and about their workload. So we are still improving and developing the AI to help us to determine the quality of cause of death in this system. But this AI thing is on process. Yeah, thank you so much. Open for any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for persevering as we seem to have all of our technical difficulties coming through for this afternoon's session. We do have a couple of minutes, but before we move on, if anyone has any questions that you'd like to send through in the chat. Yes, I agree, a very interesting project. Perhaps while people are sending through their questions, you touched on it on your last slide as well around the difficulties in having enough auditors, and I wanted to see you know, how many auditors you were using as part of the project, and what kind of training you know, that they've been through to do this role for countries that might be interested in doing something similar.
As I mentioned, there are 11 pilot province. Each province will have at least 2 doctors. So now we might have about 30 auditor doctor, and our team has and the expert go to each province to like give them a training. Yeah, it's like that.
Thank you. No, it's yes, a hugely human resource intensive project, I'm sure. We've probably got time for one question, and I've seen it just pop through in the chat. So someone was just interested to know a little bit about the common quality issues or the incorrectness types of issues that you were seeing coming through as identified by the auditor.
Yeah, the common mistake is that first the first thing that they is it like it is like a tradition that they usually conclude underlying cause of death at heart failure, which is the mode of death. But it is like a tradition, but on along the way that we go to training, we try to give them the true like principle of concluded, like the underlying cause of death. You have to like search more about their treatment history. But and one thing that we try to do is that we try to change the TARA 4/1, the death certificate form, into more like cut out of mode of death thing, so like there is no confusion in recording the data.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be many more questions. So if you do have questions, please put them aside for now, and then we can use them in the Ask the Author session at the end. So thank you very much for sharing the great processes being implemented in Thailand. So what we are going to do now is go back in time a little bit. Hopefully our presenter from Laos has been able to join us. I know we've had a few technical difficulties this afternoon. There we go. Have we got sound?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Dr. For joining us. So everybody, this afternoon we are now going to speak with Dr. Sukuksway Sukanche from the Lao Tropical Public Health Institute, and he's going to talk us through the mapping processes that they did looking at the mortality information systems and some of the fragmentation and issues that were identified as part of the mapping process. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I am Sukuksway Sukanche from Lao Tropical and Public Health Institute from Lao PDR. Before I begin, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to involve in these forums. Today, I'm really pleased to talk about the mortality information system in Lao PDR. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, and in many countries in Asia-Pacific region have a incomplete and underdeveloped CRVS system. This means that the accurate and up-to-date national vital statistics are not available, which can have a serious consequence to population and socio-economic policies. So in the health sector, having a reliable data on number of birth, death, and the cause is critical for decision making, for resource allocation, and also for planning of the health system. To ensure mortality information system and address this challenge, it is important to have true understanding of the structures and the progression of the CRVS systems. So this can enable the country to identify the gaps and the area for the improvements. Can you go to the next slide? Next slide, please. No, can you move back again? Yes. Now in this slide, in Laos, PDR has approved the CRVS strategies in 2017. But however, as of 2018, only 36% of deaths were being captured in the system, and with just only 7% of annual deaths occurring in the healthcare facilities. And the completeness of death registration in Laos PDR still remain low, and especially in the rural and remote areas, which health facility may be limited. And also for the cause of the silos of the mortality informations in Laos, it make the integration, the mortality information system in here is quite hard. So the goal of our study is to mapping the existing subsystem where the information about the death being captured in the structure in the health sector in Laos PDR. Can you go to the next slide? In this slide, we are discussing a design and the setting of the study that conduct in health sector of Vientiane capital in Laos PDR. The study was a cross-sectional study that that used a purposive sample to choose the participants based on the criteria that they involved in the mortality informations. And the aim of the study was to collect the data relevant to the characteristic in the health sectors. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, and to collect the data for the study, we use a combination of document reviews and informal interview with the key actor in the health systems. For the document reviews, we involve the existing record and report that relate to mortality system in Laos PDR. And for informal interview, we'll conduct with the individual who were considered to be the key actor in the health sectors, such as a doctor, health providers, statisticians, or administration staff. And the aim of this interview was to gain deeper understanding of the current state of mortality system in the health sector in the country. And for data analysis, we use Visaki modeler to visualize the mapping and do the mapping. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, from the finding, our study found that the mortality system in Laos PDR are not integrated and rarely heavy on family to report the death events. And the lack of compatibility among subsystems result the family have to interact with the system up to 3 times to complete the death registrations. And furthermore, we could not identify any international standard form to collect the information about the death in the health facilities. And beside that, the Ministry of Public Security and Home Affairs also collected data on the mortalities. Next slide, please. And here is the mortality information system in Mahos Hospital that we do the mapping. First, in here, when the death occurs in the hospital, it's like the doctor will have to complete 3 death notification forms, one to the families, one to the information unit, and one to keep in the medical records. So this is have the parallel that they have 3 parallels. And also in the one hospital, we can identify 6 database that they are not integrated in with each other. Also, we found the form that are not follow the international standard form that contained in the hospital. Can you go to next slide? And here is the slide of the mortality information system in Lao PDR. So this will show you about the family have to interact with the system up to 3 times. At the top of the mapping, you can see that the family have, even they got the notification from the hospital, they still also have to declare to the village chief and the district office of home affairs to complete the date registration, and then they will to get the complete and also get the date certificate from the village chiefs. Also in this map, and also show the database that not integrated in the system, which we have one in with Ministry of Health, one in Ministry of Home Affairs, and one from Ministry of Public Security. Next slide, please. So in the discussions finding relevance, the mortality information system in Laos, like integration across the institution and CRVS, and depend on the family to register the date events. And this is a common problem in low middle income country due to the inefficient CRVS operation and family being responsible for the completing the administrative procedures. Consequently, basic vital statistics in Lao PDR are captured mainly throughout the household survey. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, for the conclusion, in Lao PDR still struggle with the integrating the system based on multiple government departments. So we found that the integrating existing subsystem that capture information about death could significantly improve the accuracy and completeness of mortality in Lao PDR. And to address this, there is a need for unified and standardized mortality information system, as well as improve the coordination and communication among the stakeholders. Yes, can you go to the next slide? Yes, here it's come to the end. I hope this presentation has highlighted the importance of the improving date registration system in Lao PDR. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for a very interesting. I think those are some of the most multiple level process maps that I've seen in quite some time. Definitely a lot of parallel processes, as you mentioned. We'll just wait and see if any questions come through in the chat box. But I'd be interested to know, you know, how you. One of the really important parts of process mapping is, of course, getting all the right stakeholders in the room, but that can also be a challenge, right? How do we know who needs to be involved and how do we get them kind of engaged and on board? And I was just wondering if you wanted to share a little bit around, you know, who you had participating as part of it, and if you had any challenges maybe with certain agencies, or if you found everyone was willing to get on board and participate in the mapping.
For the participating in this mapping, we choose from the criteria that they involved with the mortality system. It's just like the for the hospital, it will be like the doctor in the each department, they report and do the summarize of the date and who fill the date notification. And we include them in each level, from one from the central hospital, and second from the district hospital, and then from the health centers. And also we still do with the statisticians in each health facility to see what the process of they doing when the doctors got the data, and then they how they send and how they compile the statistic in each health facilities. Yes.
Yeah, that's no, that's great. And I think, as you just mentioned, it's always important to often what you're told is the process is not quite the same as what happens on the ground. So being there to see it and work with the doctors is also very important. And I think we've got a comment there just saying that human intervention and good systems are needed as part of effective death registration. Our IT systems can't fix everything. It's all about people power. So thank you again for sharing your experiences in Laos. And again, I strongly encourage people to join after the session for the Ask the Author session if you're interested in doing business process mapping or have more questions for our colleague from Laos about what they found and what their next steps are. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so now we are going to move on to our next presenter, who has been very patiently waiting as we've moved the agenda around a little bit. So thank you very much. We've got Dr. Rangana Wajugidara from the Ministry of Health in Sri Lanka, and he's going to be talking to us about the work that they have done similarly around streamlining their mortality inquest system in Sri Lanka to get good quality mortality data. So the floor is yours. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Nicola. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you. It is my pleasure to be here today to present on the topic streamlining of mortality inquest system in Sri Lanka. Death is an inevitable part of life, and the accurate recording of death is crucial for public health policy and planning. Yet, despite ongoing effort to improve the civil registration and vital statistics system, there is one critical aspect that remains overlooked: the mortality inquest pathway. This pathway, which serves as a vital component of the CRVS system, has been neglected for too long. My presentation today focuses on the topic streamlining of mortality inquest system in Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to express my gratitude to all those who have contributed to this intervention. I would like to acknowledge the technical working group that guided this intervention, which include the members from the Ministry of Health with the leadership of Additional Secretary Public Health Services, Dr. Lakshmi Somatunga, and Registrar General's Department, Department of Census and Statistics, and Ministry of Justice, Sri Lanka. Their expertise and support were invaluable in the success of this intervention, and I extend my sincere appreciation to all the outstanding contribution to the technical working group. I'm grateful for the technical and financial support provided by Bloomberg Data for Health initiative through Vital Strategies, which made this intervention possible. And I would like to extend my gratitude to all my colleagues at Vital Strategies and Data for Health initiative for their support and guidance. Next slide, please. Without good quality mortality statistic, countries' planning will be in a vacuum and sustainable development cannot be achieved. Despite very high level of death registration completeness, more than 97% of death registration completeness in the country, quality of mortality data produced by the CRVS system remain unsatisfactory with low vital statistic performance indexes. Further, the assessment studies of quality of cause of death in Sri Lanka have demonstrated high proportion of unusable and unspecified causes even among the leading cause of deaths in the country. Similarly, as seen in most of the countries, CRVS system of Sri Lanka has been a multi-sectoral engagement with the Registrar General Department, Department of Census and Statistics, Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Health. Increased complexity of this multi-sectoral involvement and lack of coordinated action had led to unsatisfactory status of CRVS improvement in the country in the past. Next slide, please. Out of all deaths in Sri Lanka, around 50% of the deaths happens in hospitals and the rest in the community. All deaths that are considered suspicious, such as those resulting from accident, suicide, homicide, and unknown cause, are subjected to investigate through the inquest process outlined in the Criminal Procedure Act of Sri Lankan law. This system plays a crucial role in civil registration and vital statistics system, as it covers deaths that occur in both hospital as well as in the community. And the inquest system in Sri Lanka cover hospital and community deaths, included those referred for post-mortem examination, which are done by the judicial medical officers in the country. The cause of death given by the judicial medical officers following a post-mortem examination is considered the most accurate, and the information is forwarded to the national mortality data through this inquest pathway. Accordingly, approximately 50% of deaths channel through to the inquest system in Sri Lanka by referral. Ultimately, all deaths are referred to the inquest system are reported to national mortality data by completing the B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death, which is filled out by the Inquirer into Sudden Deaths, or the ISDs, who conducts this inquest in the country. Next slide, please. A significant number of deaths that go through the inquest system, including those that have undergone post-mortem examination, are certified using B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death. However, this form was not compatible with International Form of Cause of Death, which was published and introduced by the World Health Organization in 2016, the latest edition. So our main objective was to implement an updated B18 form, which is with WHO standard on cause of death certification. The B18 form, which was used previously and introduced during the colonial era, does not contain standardized information on the cause of death as specified in the frame A and frame B of the International Cause of Death Certificate. This lack of standardized information has created a barrier for ICD coding at the national level. Next slide, please. Methodology. The National CRVS Committee of Sri Lanka serves as a centralized coordinating body at the national level, consisting of 4 main stakeholder organizations: the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Justice, Department of Census and Statistics, and Registrar General's Department. This committee oversees all CRVS improvement activities in the country. The CRVS National Committee identified the deficiency of information flow of mortality data caused by the previously used P18 Inquirer Certificate of Death. A technical working group consisting of all relevant institutional stakeholders was appointed with the objective of bringing amendments to the B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death. Following a series of consultative meetings, an amended B18 form was developed with the international standard, and the technical working group decided to pre-test this form before island-wide implementation. Next slide, please. The pre-test, or the study, involved 10 inquirers into sudden death who was invited to participate voluntarily and fill out the updated version of B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death as per the 6 case scenarios designed by the Technical Working Group Committee. The certificate they filled out were assessed by a panel of experts based on 10 common errors done when filling cause of death forms. Following the pre-test, a discussion was conducted with the participants, the participating ISDs, and their comments and on the usability of the new form was also recorded. Next slide, please. The results came as the mean error count of the death certificate filled by these ISDs was recorded as 3.48. That means an average death certificate had 3.48 errors. The 0 errors were identified for the eligibility of handwriting, and the most common error identified was the missing time interval when certifying cause of death, which is 66%. And also 43% of the death certificate filled by the ISDs during this pre-test were found to be with clinically improbable sequence of cause of death, and errors made in the other sections, including the circumstance of death, bears the same percentage. During the discussion with participants, additional deficiencies were identified in the updated form. The inquiry into sudden deaths pointed out that space provided for writing the full name, address are not sufficient, and also they pointed out that there should be allocation of space to write the funeral arrangements. So like that, we were able to gather some important points from them to increase the usability of this form. Next slide, please. Discussion. The death certificate filled during the pre-test were legible, completely legible, but it is uncertain if the same result of complete legibility would be obtained during the routine practice, because they are filling this form in hospital busy setup and also in the community, in household with a lot of stresses. So we can't expect the same complete legibility when filling this form. The most common error made by the inquiry into sudden death is filling death certificate is the missing time interval, which was not included in the previous format used since 1954. And this error will be addressed as Sri Lanka moves toward the international standard of certification of death. The inquirers into sudden death who are not medical professionals and have minimal knowledge on pathophysiology of diseases showed higher proportion of death certificate with clinically improbable sequences of deaths, cause of death, and a higher percentage of ill-defined conditions, possibly due to their lack of formal pre-service or in-services training for them. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the usability of the new B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death was enhanced based on the feedback from the participants, including the changes in formatting to provide sufficient space for certain parameters after the pretest. And also the final draft of the updated B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death was sent to the relevant ministry through the National Steering Committee of CRVS, and a gazette notification was issued on 9th July 2023 by the government of Sri Lanka, enabling implementation of the new certificate. It was found that lack of pre-service and in-service training for inquiry into sudden death was a major deficiency, and an in-service training program was launched in April 2022 to train all ISDs on proper cause of death certification as a D4H supported activity. Next slide, please. The training program has successfully trained 482 inquirers into sudden death, covering all 25 districts in Sri Lanka, with 98% participation rate from the ISDs, and is expected to ensure proper implementation of the new format and also to enhance the quality and feasibility of this new form. These are some of the pictures of the training conducted island-wide. Next slide, please. In conclusion, the effort made to streamline the mortality inquest system in Sri Lanka through the introduction of the updated B18 Inquirer Certificate of Death and The in-service training for inquirers into sudden death have shown promising results in improving the quality and feasibility of cause of death information. With institutionalized pre-service and in-service training, we can ensure more accurate and reliable mortality inquest system for the benefit of public health and well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it's always great to hear from countries with relatively good systems, that there's always work to be done. And I think that the work that's happening in Sri Lanka and also Thailand from the earlier presentation is a great testament to the fact that there's always more that we can be doing to improve our mortality registration and also our vital statistics. So there's a couple of comments that I can see in the chat. So one of them is asking if you have a system, and I'm assuming it's an electronic system, but if you have a system being used in the preparation of your death certificates, or are they all manually filled out paper-based forms?
Yes, actually we are having a fully paper-based system, but it is well established. Quality and timeliness is not up to the standard, but it is fully implemented paper-based system.
Thank you. And I guess just linking from that, were the discussions as part of this about the need to implement electronic systems, or do you feel the country's happy with the system? Paper works as well.
Yes, exactly. Now our National Steering Committee on Civil Registration and Vital Statistics has approved a digitalized system which has embedded monitoring and evaluation of mortality data, and we are in the process of implementing that system.
Fantastic, thank you. That might be a good discussion point to go into more detail at the end of the session. There's one more question in the chat as well that we've got time to do. And so someone was just interested to learn a little bit more about some of the major factors that are affecting the quality of the mortality data being produced by your CRVS system, that need improvement or that you might be focusing on at the moment.
Yes. In our CRVS system, the completeness of mortality data is very high. The main issues are with the quality and timeliness. In quality-wise, the medical certification of cause of death done for hospital deaths remain comparatively high standard, but non-medically certified cause of deaths has a lot of errors and unspecified causes we can see. So we are trying to improve each category of certifiers to improve the cause of death, and also we are trying to increase the proportion of medical certification even for community deaths in Sri Lanka.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you again. So for those people that left some questions in the chat, if you've got more discussions, I know I could ask lots more questions, but in the interest of time, we will move on. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. And please, everybody, ask more questions at the end of this session. So we are now moving on to our final presentation of the session. Congratulations, everybody, for hanging in there till the end. We are very lucky to be joined by Mr. David Ustavi from the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, Georgia, and also in collaboration with UNFPA. And he's going to talk to us about a report that was recently published looking at the quality and availability of demographic and healthcare data in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So we're great to get some information from all of the sub-regions within ESCAP. So, David, I think you are good to go. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be presenting this report that we did thanks to the support of UNFPA. Basically, what we tried to do here is take some raw data from the Global Data Barometer, which is an international global study of open data and the use of open data for public good. And we tried to concentrate this data towards to get some in-depth analysis on healthcare data and demographic data specifically. More on that when I'll discuss the methodology, but our main motivation to conduct this study and produce this report was the emphasized importance of international standardized data in the field of healthcare, prompted by the wave of the pandemic and the COVID-19 in the previous years. It has become more and more an actual point to gather as much information cross-border about ongoing events and ongoing health conditions and health events on a large scale, such as pandemics and other such large-scale events. What we try to do here is we try to channel the raw data produced by the Global Data Barometer and kind of derive some insights about our region, the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, including 11 countries. If we could switch to the next slide here, as I understand, yeah, okay. Our main focus here was the CRVS systems, as well as the availability of vaccination data and other vital statistics. And next slide, to speak more about the methodology. I will have to introduce the Global Data Barometer a little bit more to go forward. So this is a very large-scale qualitative study of 109 nations. This study is conducted using local researchers that over several months, using the same methodology for each country, gather information and gather data in their respective countries. And by the end, we have this very comprehensive country reports that gives us an idea of the data ecosystems in each participating country. But as you might expect from such a large-scale study, it is very broad, and the GDB is one of the main negatives of the GDB is that it does not really derive any specific insights and analysis. So to kind of take advantage of the enormous amount of raw data gathered, we try to focus on these 11 countries and only 3 modules of the 11 modules of GDB, which had to do with health data and vital statistics, to sort of derive these specific insights. Next slide, please. What we noticed first is that the use of the ICD-10 standards to record mortality data and birth statistics is very sporadic in these target 11 countries. And it's even useful to mention ICD-11 because it has not yet been implemented anywhere. But as the first step, the ICD-10 would be a enormous step for most of the studied countries. Most what we found publish mortality and vital statistics as an aggregated, heavily aggregated form, and pretty much useless for further processing and further analysis. Another thing that we noticed, a difference from our Western counterparts, there is very low availability of real-time healthcare system data. So, for example, we found that in Germany or Austria or Ireland, we had several examples of real-time healthcare data being widely available. The number of free beds in hospitals, number of ventilation, a number of specific medications available at specific hospitals. So this type of data availability is not present in any of the countries that we assessed. And this is one of the recommendations that I will mention later on. Of course, this has to do with some very large-scale reforms that would require a large amount of investment and funding. And as you might know, countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia are not very are not able to direct this type of resources towards such large-scale reforms very often, but this is still something that could benefit the overall healthcare sector by a large margin. And of course, these are not the only findings. You can find the entire report linked below. And one last finding I will mention is the vaccination data. We found that most countries that we assessed published vaccination data in a very aggregated form, or they do not publish it at all. It is very rarely in a machine-readable form. So it's not available to process and analyze by third parties. And one of our recommendations has to do with this as well. Could we switch the slide, please? So the main points of discussion that arise from our reports were basically we highlighted several key sectors that we could stimulate action to really encompass a change in all the target countries. So these few things would affect the healthcare ecosystems, healthcare data ecosystems positively in pretty much all target countries. First of all would be the identification of essential information for monitoring and management in the health sector. This would give some basic level of standardization and some framework in which these countries could operate in. The next would be establishing more concrete standards, and well, we discussed the ICD-10. It is important to really spread the use of ICD-10 and other similar standards for cross-border management of data and other such processes. And lastly, there is need for legislation. What we found is that there is very low amount of legislation surrounding open data and data in general, especially in the Central Asian countries, because, well, one of the countries assessed was Ukraine, and Ukraine has some of the most robust legislation around this subject. So I can't really generalize on this, but there is a significant lack of legislation around data management, data processing, and data collection in all Central Asian countries and most of the Eastern European countries that we looked at. Next slide, please. Well, the conclusions, first of all, as I mentioned, the need for regulatory framework. compared to several other countries. And if you look at the GDB, the Global Data Barometer results, you will see you can filter the data by availability of legislation in various fields. So data governance or data collection or interoperability frameworks and so on. And you will see most of our target countries lagging behind other European countries and other more developed healthcare systems. So the next point that we came across is the lack of political will in the countries that we found had the highest development of data ecosystems. We found several evidences of strong political will. So this is basically what led us to conclude that in small countries, in small post-Soviet countries, such as the ones that we surveyed, strong political will of one or two stakeholders is an important catalyst to start reforms and innovations in this field and in this direction. Capacity building activities were an important thing that we also noticed in, for example, Ukraine, in other countries with developed data ecosystems. And of course, this is a top from bottom up approach. If the regular public workers have no experience with data processing and other data management practices, it is very hard to build an effective data ecosystem in the country. So regular capacity building activities are essential for development in this regard. And Estonia also had a very good practice of this approach. Very regular and large-scale trainings for public servants and other involved stakeholders. Next slide, please. Next point we identified as a very important and crucial part was the partnerships between involved stakeholders. So the open data is pretty much useless unless it is being used and processed by local civil society organizations and media outlets. So the governments need to actively engage these stakeholders and really build these ecosystems around their needs to make sure that the data that they're publishing is being used and is being used to benefit the society as a whole. And lastly, what I would like to mention is that shifting the focus on the economic potential of open data has evidence that this kind of shift has stimulated growth in this direction and motivated the decision makers to move forward in this direction and kind of catalyze the reforms in developing open data practices and open data ecosystems. And I believe this was, we can go to the next slide. Yes, so to move on to very specific recommendations, there was a lack of granularity in terms of geographic location in almost all surveyed countries. This would be the first thing to really improve on and focus on, because almost all countries have the ability to provide this granularity at the level of municipalities or even cities and below. The vaccination data was one of the big challenges. It is important to depersonalize and disclose these data in individual records so that it is useful for analysis and deriving insights by other third-party researchers and organizations. The birth data is very broad. Almost all countries surveyed. They lack data points, important data points such as gestational age, birth weight, the age of the parents, and other very important data points that do not that are really important for deriving insights. And the standardized systems that we already mentioned, ICD-10 needs to be more widespread in the region, and the healthcare data systems as a whole need to shift towards real-time capacity data availability. So this, of course, requires a lot of investment, a lot of funds, but we have seen in the countries that have already implemented real-time systems that it has large-scale benefits in handling events such as pandemics and other large-scale developments. I believe this is my last slide. Of course, this is very broadly that I managed to fit in this small presentation. You can check out the full report. We have country sheets for each target country, so 11 country sheets with very specific information for each. And so for now, I'm ready for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. As we give people some time to put their chats in, it was funny, as you were talking, I wrote down all of the points, and I feel like you've touched on many things that we've spoken about over the last 2 days. You know, the need for standards, which I think we opened about. Philip mentioned that. You know, at the beginning of the session, capacity building was mentioned a number of times. The need for political will and champions, and I note one of the comments that came up on the chat on the side said, you know, that we can't control the availability and the keenness of our medical attendants in using these standards. So again, you know, how do we get people on board, you know, open data and just the data ecosystem? And it reminded me of yesterday's conversations that we had around the need to ensure good legislation and protection, you know, and making sure that as we get this more granular data that we don't inadvertently harm anyone, you know, as we are trying to get better data. We need to make sure that we've got those frameworks in place. So I feel that you've touched on things that we've spoken about, and also I feel it's a beautiful introduction to our next session where we're talking about statistics and vital statistics in a little bit more detail. So thank you so much for sharing the insights from that. So we've just got, would you I'm just trying to read the comments on the side there about more collaboration around geographic location data. Would you like more? I'm not sure if they're just asking for collaboration to help.
And we're always looking for any work that we can do towards advancing the cause of open data. So yeah, we can, you have my contact information displayed, right? So you can always reach out. I, as well as my organization that I represent, IDFI, are always ready to and open for proposals.
Thank you. And I think that also brought up a really interesting point, particularly for countries in the Pacific in our region. We had a meeting recently around the need for cross-border sharing, you know, and how to share our data in a pandemic, such as what we had through COVID, but also just in terms of, you know, closing off our identity systems if deaths happen in different countries, and kind of what processes can we get in place to kind of have these nice interoperable data ecosystem. So thank you again for raising that one. I can't see any more questions coming through on the chat, but again, if you do have questions, I hope David can stay to join for the session. Yep, we will certainly share his information for the Ask the Author session at the end of this one. So thank you very much for your time today, David.
Thank you for the attention and the interest. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentations for today. So as we have done in the previous few sessions, we are now going to break for 30 minutes to have our Ask the Author sessions. So as before, we'll be popping up the Teams links in the chat. Please feel free to move around. I know we had some really good conversations happening in the previous few sessions today, so thank you to those who are engaging and participating in these. We feel that they've been really beneficial. So we will put the Teams links up, half an hour to have a chat with the various authors. And then once this session finishes, we'll have a little bit of a break before moving into our final session for the day. So there we go. I can see the links popping up on the side. So again, as you're ready, just move into the rooms. There'll be a few of us staying in the main room for anybody that gets lost. Hopefully our technical difficulties have left us for the day. So please do join the rooms. We'll see you back in the main room once it has concluded, and thank you everybody for your participation and for the speakers at this session. I hope to see you all